The Missouri River stretched like a muddy serpent beneath the early autumn sky as Sarah Miller stood at the bow of the riverboat, her gloved hands gripping the railing. The year was 1875, and she had left everything she knew in Boston to marry a cattle rancher she'd never met, a man who signed his letters simply as William Thompson. The boat's paddle wheels churned the murky water as they approached the trading post of Fort Worth, where her future waited. Through the mist, Sarah could make out the bustling riverside docks loaded with cotton bales and cattle pens. Her trunk contained everything she owned: 3 dresses, her mother's silver brush set, and a stack of letters from William that spoke of vast grasslands and a prosperous ranch called the Triple T. What the letters didn't reveal was why such an allegedly successful rancher would need to seek a wife through advertisement. The boat's whistle pierced the morning calm as they approached the dock. Sarah smoothed her navy traveling dress, touching the locket at her throat that held her parents' miniatures. At 25, she was considered nearly a spinster back east. But here in the Western Territories, she hoped to find purpose beyond the stifling drawing rooms of Boston society. A tall figure in a black hat stood waiting on the dock, and Sarah's heart quickened. But as she descended the gangplank, she realized it wasn't one man but 3 who waited, nearly identical in height and build, with the same sandy hair and square jaw. They removed their hats in unison, and the one in front spoke. "Miss Miller? I'm William Thompson. These are my brothers, Jake and Samuel." Sarah's confusion must have shown on her face because William quickly added, "We run the Triple T together, ma'am. I hope you don't mind that I didn't mention my brothers in the letters. Sometimes it's easier to explain things in person." But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of anxiety, that made Sarah wonder what else he might have failed to mention. The brothers loaded her trunk into a wagon while Sarah studied them surreptitiously. They moved with the same fluid grace, finished each other's sentences, and seemed to communicate without words. William drove the wagon while Jake and Samuel rode alongside on horseback, all 3 scanning the horizon with the watchful eyes of men accustomed to danger. As they traveled, William explained that they were moving a large herd north to Abilene before winter set in. "We'll need to leave within the week," he said. "I hope that gives you enough time to settle in at the ranch." Sarah noticed how Jake and Samuel exchanged glances at this, some unspoken message passing between them that made her increasingly uneasy. The Triple T Ranch sprawled across rolling prairie, its whitewashed buildings neat and well-maintained. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The brothers' interactions seemed rehearsed, their explanations too carefully worded. And why did they take turns disappearing for hours at a time, always ensuring that only 1 or 2 were visible at any moment? That evening, as Sarah unpacked her belongings in the room they'd prepared, she heard raised voices from the barn. Creeping closer, she caught fragments of an argument. "Can't keep this up forever," and "federal agents asking questions in town." Her heart pounding, Sarah pressed herself against the barn wall, straining to hear more. The words conscription and desertion drifted through the gaps in the wooden planks. The truth began to take shape in her mind, a truth as stark as the prairie sunset. These 3 brothers weren't simply sharing a ranch. They were sharing an identity. William Thompson was a fiction, a composite character created to hide from military service. The letters she'd treasured, the man she'd agreed to marry, was actually 3 men playing a dangerous game of deception. Sarah retreated to her room, mind racing. The reward for reporting draft dodgers would be enough to set her up comfortably anywhere she chose. But as she recalled the gentle way they'd helped her from the boat, the obvious care they took in maintaining their ranch, she felt her certainty waver. These men weren't criminals. They were brothers trying to preserve their way of life. As darkness settled over the prairie, Sarah heard the low mooing of cattle and the distant howl of a coyote. She stood at her window, watching the brothers move about the yard by lamplight, efficient and coordinated like a single organism. The decision she would make would change not just her life, but theirs as well. And time was running out. Federal agents were already asking questions in town. A soft knock at her door startled Sarah from her vigil. "Miss?" It was the youngest brother, Samuel, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're moving the cattle at first light. The agents—" He paused, clearing his throat. "They've been seen riding north from Silver City. We can't wait any longer." The urgency in his tone made her heart race, though she noticed he was careful not to pressure her either way. Through the thick wooden door, Sarah could hear the other brothers' boots on the floorboards below, their hushed voices carrying up through the ranch house as they prepared for what lay ahead. The creek that fed their land connected to the major river routes heading north, their likely escape path if they chose to run. She'd seen enough river trade during her journey west to know how vital these waterways were, both for commerce and clandestine travel. Dawn broke over the prairie in streaks of amber and rose, finding Sarah already dressed and descending the stairs. The brothers had loaded a wagon with supplies, their movements precise and practiced. Jake, the eldest, was consulting a weathered map spread across the kitchen table, while Thomas checked their rifles with methodical care. The life they'd built here, the thriving cattle operation, the well-maintained ranch house, would all be forfeit if they fled. The herd needs to be moved anyway, Jake explained when he saw her, his tone carefully neutral. Up to the summer pastures near Fort Worth. If we time it right, we can use the cattle drive as cover. He didn't need to finish the thought. Cover for their escape to Canada, if that's what they chose. If that's what she allowed them to choose. The weight of their fate pressed against her chest like a physical thing. Sarah watched as Samuel worked with the horses, his gentle way with the animals revealing a patience she hadn't expected in one so young. These men weren't the rough outlaws she'd imagined draft dodgers to be. They were farmers, ranchers, brothers bound by blood and circumstance. The fictitious William Thompson they'd created in their letters had captured her heart with his thoughtful words and quiet strength. Now she saw those same qualities distributed among the three of them, like facets of a single soul. The sound of hoofbeats in the distance made them all freeze. Thomas quickly doused the lantern, plunging the barn into gray pre-dawn shadows. Through the slats, Sarah could make out riders on the road, not the federal agents, but locals from town. Still, the brothers' tension was palpable. They couldn't afford to trust anyone now. Their carefully constructed life was unraveling thread by thread. "We need to move," Jake said softly, leading his horse from the stall. "The cattle are gathered in the north pasture. Miss Sarah ... He hesitated, meeting her eyes. "We understand if you need to make your way back to Abilene. There's enough in the strongbox to see you settled wherever you choose." The offer was genuine, she could tell, but it carried an undercurrent of hope that she might choose differently. Sarah thought of the federal agent's reward money, enough to give her the independence she'd dreamed of when leaving her small town back east. But as she watched the brothers prepare for their journey, perhaps their last together on American soil, she realized money wasn't everything. These men had created something remarkable here, not just in their ranch but in the way they supported and protected each other. The William Thompson she'd fallen in love with through those letters might have been a fiction, but the heart behind those words was very real. The sun crested the horizon as Sarah made her decision. Without a word, she began helping Samuel load the last of the supplies. The cattle would need to be moved regardless of what came next, and she'd never been one to shy away from hard work. Whether this drive led them north to Fort Worth or further still to the Canadian border, she knew her place was here, helping these brothers who had shown her what family truly meant. The morning air carried the earthy scent of cattle and damp grass as Sarah helped the brothers prepare for their departure. Samuel, the eldest, mapped their route along the Red River, marking the trading posts where they could resupply without drawing attention. His weathered hands traced the path north, past Fort Worth where federal agents would be watching the usual cattle trading routes. They'd need to be clever, using the river communities as cover while making their way toward the Canadian border. Thomas, the youngest of the three, worked quietly beside Sarah, his usual jovial nature subdued by the weight of their situation. He'd been the one who'd written most of the letters she'd fallen in love with, sharing stories of life on the ranch with an openness his brothers lacked. Now, as he adjusted the saddle on his bay mare, she caught him watching her with a mixture of guilt and gratitude that made her heart ache. The cattle, nearly 200 head, would provide the perfect cover for their escape. Driving the herd north was common enough this time of year, with ranchers seeking better prices in the northern markets. James, their neighbor who'd agreed to help with the drive, arrived just as the sun cleared the tree line, leading 3 extra horses and bringing news that made Samuel's face darken. "Federal marshals were asking questions in Abilene yesterday," James reported in hushed tones. "They're offering $500 for information about draft dodgers. Some folks are mighty interested in that kind of money." Sarah Miller gripped the railing of the riverboat as it churned steadily northward along the Missouri River toward Fort Worth. The spring air carried a hint of warmth, but her thoughts remained frozen on the mysterious letters she'd exchanged with William Thompson over the past year. His eloquent words had won her heart from afar, yet something about his latest message troubled her. Subtle changes in penmanship and tone that she couldn't quite place. The bustling river port of Fort Worth emerged around a bend, its wooden buildings and busy wharves a welcome sight after weeks of travel. Sarah smoothed her travel-worn dress, checking that her small savings remained safely pinned inside her bodice. The reward poster she'd spotted in Abilene still burned in her mind. $500 for information leading to the capture of draft dodgers. She pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on spotting her intended among the crowd gathered at the dock. A tall man with wheat-colored hair stepped forward as she descended the gangplank. "Miss Miller, I'm William Thompson." His voice carried a gentle drawl, but his eyes darted nervously. Behind him stood two other men loading crates onto a wagon, their features bearing such a striking resemblance to William that Sarah's breath caught. Brothers, surely. But something about their furtive glances set her already racing heart pounding faster. That evening, settled into the Thompson Ranch house overlooking the river valley, Sarah observed the three brothers with growing suspicion. They moved with an odd synchronicity, finishing each other's sentences and sharing meaningful looks. William seemed to fade into the background whenever James took charge of conversation, while Thomas hovered anxiously in doorways. Their mannerisms were so similar, yet distinctly different, like actors playing variations of the same role. The truth emerged during a midnight conversation, when Sarah caught James signing a letter as William. Her gasp drew three pairs of guilty eyes. The brothers had been taking turns writing to her, sharing the identity of William Thompson to avoid military service. Their family cattle operation required all three to survive, they explained, and the draft would have destroyed everything they'd built. Sarah's mind reeled as she processed the deception, even as her heart recognized the echoes of the man she'd fallen in love with spread across three souls. Days blurred together as Sarah found herself drawn deeper into the brothers' world. The ranch operated like a finely tuned instrument, each brother playing his essential part. James handled business dealings with a silver tongue. Thomas managed the cattle with an almost mystical understanding of the beasts, and William's steady hand kept their books balanced. Together, they'd built something remarkable, something worth protecting, perhaps even worth breaking the law to preserve. Federal agents began appearing with increasing frequency at the riverport, checking manifests and questioning travelers. Sarah recognized one as Catherine Davis, a stern-faced woman who'd been on her riverboat from Abilene. The woman's sharp eyes seemed to linger on the Thompson Ranch whenever she passed, and Sarah noticed how the brothers grew more cautious, limiting their trips into town and avoiding public gatherings. A massive cattle drive loomed on the horizon, the brothers' chance to sell their herd and secure enough funds to potentially start fresh in Canada. But moving hundreds of head of cattle north while dodging authorities would require perfect timing and more than a little luck. Sarah found herself making excuses to delay Catherine Davis's investigations, even as guilt gnawed at her conscience. The reward money could secure her own future, but at what cost to these men who'd shown her nothing but kindness? The brothers' secret became harder to maintain as spring roundup brought neighboring ranchers to help with the cattle. Sarah watched James navigate social interactions with careful precision, never letting anyone speak to William for too long before another brother would smoothly take his place. The charade was masterful but exhausting, and she could see the toll it took on all three men. Each night, they gathered on the porch, speaking in low voices about routes north and contingency plans. Thomas proved especially attentive to Sarah's comfort, sharing stories of their childhood and teaching her to read cattle behavior. James challenged her mind with discussions of literature and philosophy, while William's quiet strength provided a steady foundation. She found herself falling in love not with one man, but with the beautiful whole they created together. The thought of betraying them became more painful with each passing day, even as the weight of their secret grew heavier. The arrival of a U.S. Marshal in Silver City sent ripples of tension through the surrounding ranches. Sarah overheard whispers at the general store about increased scrutiny of homestead claims and military draft records. Her heart raced when she recognized the name of the investigator, Jake Morrison, the same marshal who'd offered her the reward money for information about draft dodgers. She hurried home, dust trailing behind her wagon as she pushed the horses harder than usual. That evening, as thunderheads gathered over the distant mountains, Sarah watched Thomas teaching a young colt to accept a halter, his gentle patience revealing the same care he showed with her. The thought of him in shackles made her physically ill. James was in the barn reviewing their ledgers, always the meticulous one, ensuring their business appeared legitimate. William stood at the fence line, his eyes scanning the horizon as if he could spot trouble before it arrived. The brothers' preparations accelerated after Sarah shared her news. Under cover of the cattle drive season, they began moving small herds north toward Fort Worth, establishing a pattern of legitimate business that could justify future travel. They carefully spread word about William, considering new grazing territories, laying groundwork for their eventual disappearance. Sarah learned to watch for signals indicating which brother was playing the role each day, helping maintain their careful dance of deception. Heavy spring rains swelled the river, bringing more steamboat traffic than usual. Sarah noticed the marshal's men watching the docks, checking manifests and questioning passengers. She began making regular trips to town, establishing herself as a familiar sight while gathering information. The shopkeepers' wives, especially Emma at the Mercantile, proved invaluable sources of gossip about the investigation's progress. One afternoon, Thomas found Sarah in the kitchen, tears falling as she kneaded bread with unnecessary force. "We've brought nothing but trouble to your life," he said softly. She turned to him, flour-covered hands clenching. "You've brought me love," she answered. "All three of you, in your own ways. That's worth any trouble." The moment hung between them, heavy with unspoken feelings, until William's warning whistle broke the spell. Another neighbor approaching. The marshal's net drew tighter as summer approached. Two families south of Silver City were arrested for harboring draft dodgers, their properties seized. Sarah spent sleepless nights planning, then proposed a solution. She would publicly break her engagement to William, appearing heartbroken and betrayed. The story would explain her future absence while providing cover for the brothers' gradual withdrawal from local society. James argued against it, unwilling to risk Sarah's reputation or safety. But she was resolute, understanding that her position as a respected woman in the community made her the perfect shield for their escape. She began her performance at Sunday services, sitting apart from the brothers and wearing a carefully constructed mask of wounded dignity. The sympathetic clucking of the church ladies told her the deception was working. The cattle drive season hit full swing, offering legitimate reason for long absences. Sarah coordinated with trusted hands to move small groups of cattle north, building their stake in safer territory. She memorized the routes to Canada, studying maps by lamplight and questioning riverboat captains about the northern passages. Each brother taught her their skills. Thomas's way with horses, James's head for numbers, William's instinct for survival, preparing her for any scenario. As federal pressure mounted, Sarah discovered an unexpected ally in Catherine, the marshal's young wife, who confided her own brother had fled the draft. Their careful friendship provided valuable warnings about upcoming raids and investigations. Through Catherine's quiet assistance, they stayed one step ahead of the law, though the constant vigilance wore on everyone's nerves. The breaking point came when Marshal Jake announced plans for a territory-wide audit of property claims. Sarah knew their carefully constructed facade couldn't withstand such scrutiny. That night, as cicadas sang in the darkness, she and the brothers made their final plans. The next cattle drive would take them north, but only after executing a complicated series of misdirections designed to confuse anyone following their trail. Their future hung on timing, luck, and the strength of the bonds they'd forged together. Sarah Miller clutched the worn leather reins as the wagon rattled along the muddy banks of the Missouri River. The spring thaw had turned the trading post of Fort Worth into a maze of treacherous mud and swollen waterways. Behind her, 30 head of cattle trudged through the mire, their bellowing mixing with the constant rush of the river. The three Thompson brothers, Jake, Samuel, and William, rode alongside the herd, their features so similar they could indeed pass for the same man at different times. The federal agents were closing in. Sarah had spotted their campfire smoke that morning, no more than half a day's ride behind them. The reward posted for the brothers was enough to set someone up for life. $5,000 for revealing their deception of sharing a single identity to dodge the Union Army draft. But Sarah's heart had grown tangled with all three men in different ways during their desperate flight north. Jake, the eldest, possessed a quiet wisdom that steadied her in moments of doubt. Samuel's quick wit and gentle humor had first won her trust when she discovered their secret. And William, the youngest, showed a fierce protective streak that made her feel truly safe for the first time since leaving her home in Tombstone. They weren't cowards. They were survivors trying to keep their family's cattle operation alive while half the men in Texas were being conscripted. The setting sun painted the river valley in shades of amber and shadow as they approached a crucial ford. The water ran high and fast with spring runoff, but crossing here would let them lose the agents in the maze of tributaries on the far side. Sarah watched William test the depth with a long pole while Samuel calmed the nervous cattle. Jake rode up beside her wagon, his face etched with concern. "We'll never get the whole herd across before dark," he said softly. "But splitting up means some of us will surely be caught." Sarah studied the swirling waters, remembering her father's lessons about river crossings back in Arizona. A plan began forming in her mind. Risky, but with a chance of success. The cattle weren't just the brothers' livelihood. They were their future in Canada, far from the reach of conscription agents. "The moon will be full tonight," Sarah replied, pointing to the pale disk already visible in the darkening sky. "If we drive the cattle into the water at moonrise, the light will help them keep their bearings. The current's strong, but not impossible." She didn't mention that she'd seen 2 cattle drives end in disaster attempting night crossings. Some risks were worth taking when the alternative was watching good men marched off to die in a war they didn't believe in. William rode back with grim news. The ford was deeper than usual, but still passable. They began separating the herd into smaller groups while Samuel rigged extra lanterns to the wagon. The sounds of approaching horses echoed from the south, still distant but growing closer. Sarah's hands trembled as she checked her rifle. She'd never shot at a man before, but she'd do what was necessary to protect her newfound family. As darkness fell, the first group of cattle entered the water, guided by William's steady voice and the lantern light. Sarah stood in the wagon bed, holding a torch high to help illuminate their path. The animals moved slowly but surely, their bulk helping them resist the current. Behind them, Jake and Samuel prepared the next group, while watching anxiously for signs of pursuit. The moon rose higher, its silver light dancing on the churning water. The night wore on as group after group of cattle made the crossing. Sarah's arms ached from holding the torch, but she didn't dare lower it. Every splash could be pursuing riders. Every shadow could hide an agent waiting to spring a trap. The brothers worked tirelessly, their years of experience showing in how they handled the nervous animals. Finally, only the wagon and the last few cattle remained on the southern bank. That's when the first shots rang out. Muzzle flashes sparked in the darkness as federal agents opened fire from the tree line. Sarah dropped to the wagon bed as bullets splintered wood around her. She heard Jake cry out in pain and Samuel's answering gunfire. William appeared from nowhere, practically throwing her from the wagon as it began to roll forward into the river. The remaining cattle scattered in panic, some swimming, others bolting back toward the agents. The wagon lurched in the current as Sarah clung to the sides. William had lashed himself to the team of horses, guiding them through the deepest part. Gunfire continued behind them, but the darkness and distance made accuracy impossible. Sarah turned to see Jake and Samuel mounting up, using the chaos of the scattered cattle to cover their retreat into the water. Her heart pounded as she watched them struggle against the current. The crossing seemed to take hours, though it couldn't have been more than minutes. The wagon finally ground onto the northern bank, the horses heaving with exhaustion. William collapsed in the mud, gasping for breath. Sarah scrambled to help him while scanning the river for the others. Through the moonlight, she saw 2 riders emerging from the water downstream. Jake was slumped in his saddle, Samuel supporting him from horseback. But they were alive. They were free. Dawn found them deep in a forested valley, well hidden from any pursuit. Sarah tended Jake's wound, a clean shot through the shoulder that looked worse than it was. The remaining cattle, about 20 head, grazed peacefully nearby. They'd lost some animals and the wagon was badly damaged, but they'd survived. More importantly, they'd crossed a line that the federal agents couldn't follow without international incident. Canada lay just days ahead. As she changed Jake's bandages, Sarah caught Samuel and William watching her with matching expressions of gratitude and something deeper. She realized then that she'd made her choice long before the crossing. These men, these brothers, had become her family. Their deception had begun as a desperate bid for survival, but it had led to something true and worth fighting for. The road ahead would be difficult, but they would face it together. A cold wind swept through the valley as Sarah finished securing Jake's bandages. The brothers had taught her well these past months: how to dress wounds, how to read weather patterns, how to survive in the wild places where civilization's reach grew thin. Now those skills would mean the difference between their freedom and capture. The federal agents might not be able to follow, but their telegrams could still race ahead, alerting Canadian authorities to watch for three brothers traveling as one man. William approached with a steaming cup of coffee brewed from their dwindling supplies. "We need to make a decision," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of their shared predicament. "The nearest trading post is 2 days' ride, but if we're recognized..." He let the thought hang unfinished in the crisp morning air. Sarah understood. They couldn't risk the larger settlements, but they needed supplies desperately. Samuel emerged from tending the cattle, his face etched with concern. "The herd's restless. Storm's coming, and we're short on feed." He glanced at Jake, who had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. "We can't keep pushing them at this pace, not with winter setting in. We need shelter, proper medicine, somewhere to wait out the worst of it." Sarah unfolded the worn map she'd kept hidden in her skirts since leaving Abilene. Her finger traced a thin line representing an old fur trading route. "There's a place," she said. "My father mentioned it once. An abandoned trading post near the Ghost River Fork. Remote enough to stay hidden, but with solid walls and a root cellar. If we can reach it before the storm hits..." The decision was made in silence, each of them understanding the stakes. They broke camp efficiently, leaving no trace of their presence. Jake insisted on riding despite his injury, though Sarah could see the pain in his tightly drawn features. The cattle moved slowly through the deepening snow, their breath creating clouds in the frigid air. As they traveled, Sarah found herself watching the brothers more closely than ever. William's quiet strength, Samuel's fierce protectiveness, Jake's stubborn determination. They were so different, yet bound together by more than blood. She thought of the wanted posters back in Silver City, how they'd reduced these complex men to a single identity, a simple crime. The truth was far more complicated, as truths usually were. The storm caught them halfway to their destination, turning the world into a swirling mass of white. Sarah pulled her coat tighter, remembering the warmth of her father's trading post in Fort Worth, the life she'd left behind. But even as the cold bit deeper, she felt a different kind of warmth, the kind that came from choosing your own family, your own path. They found the abandoned trading post just as darkness was falling. It was smaller than Sarah had imagined, its log walls weathered by countless seasons, but it was solid. More importantly, it had a large stable area where they could shelter the cattle. Inside, they found old furniture covered in dust, shelves still holding preserved goods from years past, and, miracle of miracles, a stack of dry firewood. As they settled in for the night, Sarah noticed something change in the brothers' demeanor. For the first time since she'd known them, they seemed to relax truly. Samuel started humming an old trail song while he tended the fire. William actually smiled as he helped Jake into a makeshift bed. They were no longer running. They were building something new. Sarah stood at the frost-covered window, watching snow blanket their tracks. Soon, all evidence of their passage would vanish, giving them time to heal, to plan, to become whatever they chose to be. The thought filled her with a fierce joy. She had come north seeking a husband and found instead a family, a purpose, a future built on trust rather than deception. Outside, the storm raged on, but within those sturdy walls, hope burned bright as the fire. They had crossed more than just a border. They had crossed from survival into living. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, not as three brothers pretending to be one man, but as a family forged in adversity and bound by choice rather than circumstance. Sarah Miller stood at the riverside dock in Fort Worth, her heart pounding as she watched federal agents searching boats along the Red River. The three Thompson brothers, Jake, Samuel, and William, were hidden in the false bottom of a cattle barge, their fate resting entirely in her hands. Just 3 months ago, she'd arrived as a mail-order bride, expecting to marry a single man named James Thompson. Instead, she'd discovered three brothers sharing one identity, taking turns living in town to maintain their deception. The morning sun cast long shadows across the muddy waters as Sarah approached Agent Thomas Davis, forcing herself to appear calm despite her trembling hands. She'd spent sleepless nights wrestling with her conscience, torn between duty to the law and loyalty to the brothers who, despite their deception, had shown her nothing but kindness and respect during her time at their Riverside ranch. "Ma'am, we have reason to believe the Thompson brothers are attempting to flee north," Agent Davis said, his keen eyes studying her face. "A substantial reward is being offered for information leading to their arrest. As James Thompson's intended bride, surely you must know something of their whereabouts." Sarah's fingers clutched the locket containing the military conscription notice she'd discovered hidden in the barn. The cattle barge creaked gently against its moorings, loaded with the brothers' prized longhorns, their life's work and only chance at starting anew across the Canadian border. Sarah thought of the evenings spent listening to Jake's guitar, Samuel's patient teachings about ranch life, and William's passionate dreams of building a better future. Each brother had contributed pieces to the James Thompson she'd fallen in love with through letters. "I'm afraid I can't help you, Agent Davis," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the weight of her choice. "James Thompson left for Abilene 3 days ago on a cattle drive. That's all I know." The lie tasted bitter, but she thought of the collection of letters she'd found. Correspondence from other women whose husbands and sons had never returned from the war. The Thompson brothers weren't cowards. They were survivors. As federal agents continued their search downstream, Sarah casually made her way to the trading post where Catherine Wilson, the owner's wife, waited with vital information about patrol schedules. The two women had formed an unlikely alliance, Catherine understanding all too well the cost of war after losing her own brother at Gettysburg. Their quiet resistance had grown to include a network of river merchants and homesteaders. Under cover of darkness, Sarah helped guide the cattle barge past the federal checkpoint, using her knowledge of the river's treacherous channels gained during countless trading runs. The brothers remained silent in their hidden compartment as she navigated through the moonlit waters, her heart racing with every passing patrol boat. The livestock above provided perfect cover, their occasional lowing masking any sounds from below. The breaking dawn revealed a changed landscape. They'd crossed into Indian territory. Sarah finally gave the signal, and the brothers emerged from their hiding place, their faces etched with gratitude and something deeper. Jake stepped forward, taking her hands in his. "We never meant to deceive you," he said softly. "Each of us fell in love with the woman behind those letters, but we knew it couldn't last." Samuel and William joined them at the helm, their usual playful banter subdued by the gravity of the moment. "Come with us," William urged, while Samuel added, "We can build something real, together." Sarah looked at each brother in turn, seeing in their faces the composite of the man she'd grown to love. The choice she'd thought impossible suddenly became clear as morning light on still water. The journey north proved treacherous, with close calls at every river crossing. Sarah's knowledge of trading routes proved invaluable as they avoided main waterways, instead following lesser-known tributaries. The brothers worked seamlessly together, their years of shared identity translating into an efficient partnership that kept both cattle and crew safe through dangerous rapids and past suspicious settlements. News reached them of increased patrols along the border, but their careful planning paid off. Elizabeth Davis, a sympathetic trader's daughter in their network, helped spread false information about Thompson sightings near Silver City, drawing federal resources away from their actual route. The deception bought them precious time as autumn's first chill crept into the air. The moment they crossed into Canadian territory brought an unexpected wave of emotion. Sarah watched as the brothers embraced, their facade finally falling away after years of careful maintenance. No longer would they need to take turns being James Thompson. Each could now live openly as himself, their shared sacrifice having earned them their freedom. The cattle they'd brought would give them a fresh start. In the end, Sarah chose to stay with them all, helping establish a new ranch where the brothers could live openly as family. Their unique arrangement raised eyebrows in their new community. But Sarah found peace in loving 3 distinct men who had each contributed to her happiness. They built a life that defied convention, much like the love story that had brought them together. The years that followed saw their Riverside ranch prosper, becoming a secret waypoint for others seeking refuge from conflicts they could not support. Sarah never regretted her choice, knowing that true justice sometimes required defying unjust laws. The Thompson brothers' deception had begun as a survival strategy, but evolved into something far more meaningful, a testimony to the power of loyalty, love, and the courage to forge one's own path. As spring bloomed along the river's edge 5 years later, Sarah stood on the wraparound porch of their thriving ranch house, watching William teach their youngest daughter Emma to ride. The sound of Jake's laughter drifted from the barn where he and Samuel were repairing tack, their easy brotherhood now worn as comfortably as their weathered boots. The deception that had once defined their lives had given way to an honest existence that, while unconventional, brought them all a deeper peace than they'd ever known. The ranch had grown into a prosperous operation, with cattle grazing the lush riverside meadows and regular shipments heading downriver to markets in Fort Worth. Their success allowed them to help others in need, just as Sarah had once helped them. The hidden cellar beneath the barn had sheltered more than a dozen conscientious objectors making their way north, each carrying stories that echoed the brothers' own struggle with conscience and duty. Word of their sanctuary spread through whispered conversations in Abilene's saloons and Silver City's general stores. Some disapproved, but most locals turned a blind eye, remembering their own ancestors' flights from persecution. The local marshal, who'd fought in too many senseless battles himself, occasionally shared coffee with Jake on the porch, deliberately avoiding questions about the fresh tracks leading north from their property. Sarah's sister Mary had initially been scandalized when she visited from Tombstone, but watching the brothers work together to raise their growing family, now including twins Catherine and Elizabeth, had softened her judgment. The girls thrived under the attention of three fathers, each contributing his unique strengths to their upbringing. Jake taught them writing, Samuel mathematics and literature, while William passed on his gift for music and storytelling. The riverside trading post they'd established became known for fair dealings and discretion. Riverboat captains learned that the Thompson Ranch was a safe harbor where no questions were asked about extra passengers who might slip aboard under cover of darkness. Sarah managed these delicate arrangements with the same quiet determination that had once led her to choose love over law. As the sun set over the river, painting the water in shades of amber and gold, Sarah often reflected on the twists of fate that had brought her here. The mail-order bride advertisement that had seemed her last hope had instead opened the door to an extraordinary life. The brothers' deception, born of desperation, had transformed into a testament to the power of chosen family and moral courage. The community they'd built extended beyond their immediate family. Other families who'd found refuge through their help sometimes settled nearby, creating a network of support and understanding. Their ranch became a gathering place for those who believed that conscience should guide actions more than convention, and that love could take many forms while remaining true. Jake, Samuel, and William had each grown into their true selves, no longer bound by the need to share a single identity. Their distinct personalities complemented each other in ways that strengthened their unusual family. Jake's practical leadership, Samuel's thoughtful wisdom, and William's creative spirit combined to create a home where their children could grow up understanding that doing right wasn't always the same as following rules. The reward money that had once threatened to tear them apart remained unclaimed, a forgotten footnote in their story. Sarah had long since realized that the real treasure lay in the family they'd created, one founded on truth and trust rather than gold or conventional morality. The river flowing past their land carried away the last whispers of their old fears, leaving behind the certainty that they had chosen the right path. As darkness settled over the ranch, Sarah gathered with her unusual family around the dinner table. The laughter of their children mingled with the brothers' easy conversation, while through the window, the river continued its eternal journey northward. Like that river, their love had carved its own course through the landscape of possibility, creating something beautiful and enduring in its wake.